Chapter 1. The Roots of Valyria, the Origin of Dragons. To understand the dragon, one must first understand the fire that birthed it. Today, we look at these flying beasts as symbols of royal power, majesty, and terrible destruction. But they were not always the lords of the sky. Long before the first Targaryen king set foot on the shores of Westeros, and even before the great towers of Valyria rose toward the heavens, there was only the earth, the ash, and the deep heat of the world. The true origin of the dragon is a riddle of history, a puzzle made of blood, stone, and ancient sorcery. To find the first pieces of this puzzle, we must travel back thousands of years to a peninsula that no longer exists, to a place where the earth itself screamed with fire. This place was known as the 14 Flames. It was a massive chain of 14 active volcanoes that stretched across the heart of the Valyrian peninsula. Even before the cataclysmic event we call the Doom, this region was a hellish landscape. The sky was permanently choked with thick black soot. The air smelled of sulfur and hot metal. Streams of liquid rock flowed down the mountain slopes like red rivers. It was a place of extreme pressure and heat, where the crust of the world was thin and fragile. Yet, in this hostile environment, life did not just survive, it thrived in forms that would terrify any modern observer. Deep beneath these burning mountains, in the pitch-black tunnels where the rock was soft and molten, lived the fireworms. These creatures are essential to understanding the history of dragons. Fireworms are not dragons, though they share a terrible relationship. They are legless, serpentine beasts that do not fly. Instead of soaring through the clouds, they bore through solid stone and soil with frightening speed. To do this, they use intense internal heat, literally melting the earth in front of them as they move. They breathe a hot, liquid flame that can turn a man to ash in a heartbeat. And heaven stinks in the dark ages of the world, before the rise of the freehold, these worms ruled the deep places. They were ancient, existing long before human eyes ever looked upon the 14 Flames. When the young worms are born, they are small, no larger than a child's arm. But as they grow older, they reach monstrous proportions. They are blind, hunting by vibration and heat, and they possess a deep, burning hunger. They have no love for humanity. Centuries later, when Valyrian masters forced thousands of slaves to dig deep into the volcanic mines for gold and silver, these slaves often encountered the worms. Entire mining parties would vanish into the dark, leaving behind nothing but scorched stone and blackened, half-eaten corpses. While the fireworms ruled the dark underworld of Essos, another cousin of the dragon ruled the skies of the far south. In the wild, diseased continent of Sothrios, explorers found the wyverns. These creatures are smaller than dragons, but they are incredibly fierce. They possess massive leathery wings, sharp talons, and cruel hooked beaks. They are pack hunters, aggressive and highly territorial. Yet, for all their aerial skill, wyverns lack one crucial ability. They cannot breathe fire. They are beasts of blood and claw, but they do not possess the inner spark of the volcano. It is here that we encounter the most fascinating and perhaps the most realistic theory of how dragons came to be. This theory comes from the writings of Septon Barth, who served as Hand of the King to Jaehaerys I. Barth was a man of great intellect who looked at the world with the eyes of a natural philosopher. He did not accept simple myths. In his famous book, Dragons, Worms and Wyverns, Barth proposed a shocking idea. He argued that dragons are not a natural species. Instead, he claimed they were created by the ancient blood mages of Valyria. According to Barth, the Valyrian sorcerers took the wyverns of the southern jungles and the fireworms of the 14 Flames and fused them together using dark, forbidden magic. They took the wings, the speed, and the aerial dominance of the wyvern and combined them with the fiery breath, the incredible heat, and the thick, protective scales of the fireworm. The result of this unnatural marriage was the dragon, a creature that could fly like a bird of prey, but carried the destructive heat of a volcano in its belly. There is much evidence to support Barth's theory. Unlike natural animals, dragons do not fit easily into the natural order of the world. Their bodies are incredibly hot, far hotter than any normal biological process should allow. Their blood is so hot that it can boil the flesh of a man who touches it. When a dragon is wounded, its blood smokes and hisses upon the cold ground. Their scales are harder than steel, yet light enough to allow for flight. These are not the traits of an animal that evolved slowly over millions of years. They are the traits of a living weapon, designed by brilliant and ruthless minds to dominate both the earth and the sky. Of course, the Valyrians themselves did not tell this story. They preferred a much more glorious origin. In their own legends, the Valyrians claimed that they did not create the dragons. Instead, they believed that the dragons simply crawled out of the 14 flames, born directly from the womb of the earth. They claimed they were kin to the beasts, sharing a common ancestry of fire and blood. To the Valyrians, the dragons were a gift from the gods of the volcano, meant to raise them above all other men. And there are other legends from the far corners of the world that tell a different tale. In the ancient city of Karth, the people tell of a time when there were 2 moons in the sky. One day, one of these moons wandered too close to the sun. The intense heat of the sun caused the moon to crack open like a giant egg. From that broken shell, 1,000,000 dragons poured forth, flying down to drink the heat of the sun. While this story is beautiful and poetic, it is highly unlikely to be true. It belongs to the realm of folklore rather than natural history. A more mysterious and troubling account comes from the ancient texts of Ashai, the dark city by the Shadowlands. These histories claim that dragons existed long before the Valyrians ever found them. According to the Ashai, an ancient and nameless people first tamed the dragons in the shadow of the mountains of the east. These forgotten people supposedly brought the dragons to the Valyrian peninsula and taught the local shepherds how to tame them. Once their task was complete, these teachers vanished from history, leaving the Valyrians with the ultimate power. Whether the dragons were created in a blood mage's laboratory or brought from the distant east, the rise of Valyria began with a simple group of people. Before they were the lords of the world, the Valyrians were humble shepherds. They lived quiet lives in the shadow of the 14 flames, tending to their flocks of sheep. They were simple, peaceful, and ignored by the great empires of the time, such as the old empire of Gis. But everything changed when they encountered the dragons nesting in the warm craters of the volcanoes. How did these simple shepherds master beasts that could reduce a village to ash in minutes? It is highly unlikely that they simply walked up to the dragons and climbed onto their backs. The process of taming must have been slow, dangerous, and incredibly bloody. Some scholars believe the shepherds began by offering sacrifices. They may have noticed that the dragons preferred cooked meat and began leaving sheep near the volcanic vents. Over generations, the dragons became accustomed to the presence of humans, much like wild wolves eventually became dogs. But simple feeding is not enough to explain the absolute control the Valyrians achieved. A dragon is not a dog, it is a creature of pride and immense power. To truly control them, the Valyrians had to turn to magic. The dragon lords of the Freehold used powerful binding spells and sorcerer's horns. The most famous of these horns, such as the one known as Dragonbinder, were made of dragon horn and banded with red gold and ancient Valyrian steel. When blown, these horns produced a sound that could crack the bones of the man who blew it. But it forced any dragon who heard it to obey the horn's master. Yet, the deepest and most dark secret of dragon taming lies in the blood. The Valyrians did not just use horns and spells. They bound themselves to the dragons on a genetic level. Through the use of blood magic, the 40 ruling families of Valyria, the Dragon Lords, created a permanent bond between their bloodlines and the beasts. They mixed their own life force with the essence of the dragons. This is why only those with Valyrian blood can ride a dragon. The beast recognizes the rider not as a master, but as a part of itself. This genetic bond explains many of the strange customs of Valyria. It is the reason why the Dragon Lords practiced extreme incest, marrying brother to sister for thousands of years. They did not do this out of madness. but out of a desperate need to keep their blood pure. If their blood became too diluted by marrying outsiders, they would lose their connection to the dragons. Without the dragons, they would lose their power, their empire, and their status as gods among men. But this unnatural bond came with a terrible price. The magic that bound human to dragon often went wrong. Throughout history, women of House Targaryen and other dragonlord families have given birth to horrific monsters. These stillborn children are often described as having scales instead of skin, small wings on their backs and tails. Some even have the eyes of a reptile. These tragic births are a clear sign of the corruption of the blood. They show that the line between human and dragon in Valyria was dangerously thin. The Valyrians had played God, and their own bodies bore the scars of their ambition. In the end, the story of the origin of dragons is not a story of natural wonder, but of human greed and dark sorcery. By combining the fireworm and the wyvern, and by binding their own blood to the resulting monsters, the Valyrians created a weapon of unmatched power. With the dragons, they conquered the known world, built cities of living stone, and ruled for thousands of years. But they also built their empire on a foundation of ash, blood, and cruelty. The very volcanoes that gave them their power would eventually destroy them, leaving behind only ruins, whispers, and the remaining beasts of fire that still carry the legacy of Valyria in their veins. Chapter 2: Anatomy of the Sky Kings. Dragon Biology and Bonds. To understand the true nature of the dragon, one must cast aside the romantic songs of the singers and examine these beasts with the cold, precise eye of a Maester. They are not merely creatures of flesh and blood, nor are they simple monsters of myth. They are living weapons of fire and magic, designed with a terrifying biological efficiency. To gaze upon a dragon is to look at a creature where every bone, scale, and breath is engineered for absolute dominance in the air and on the battlefield. Let us first examine their physical structure. Unlike the false drawings made by artists in the free cities, a true dragon is a tetrapod. It does not possess 4 legs and 2 wings. Instead, it has only 2 hind legs and 2 great wings that serve as its forelimbs. When a dragon walks upon the earth, it moves much like a giant bat, using the heavy joints of its wings to support its massive weight. This skeletal design is essential. Had they been burdened with 2 extra limbs, the sheer muscle and bone mass would have made flight impossible. The bones of a dragon are unlike those of any other beast. They are black as polished obsidian, rich in iron, and incredibly strong. Yet they are also hollow and remarkably light. This unique combination of strength and lightness allows a creature the size of a galley to lift itself into the sky. The muscles that attach to the breastbone are immense, providing the incredible power needed to beat the great leathery wings and catch the thermal winds of the high heavens. Covering this skeletal frame is an armor of scales. When a dragon first hatches, its scales are soft, bright, and almost jewel-like in their coloration. At this stage, a young dragon is vulnerable, easily harmed by common weapons. But as the beast grows, its scales change. They absorb heat and minerals from the dragon's own body, growing thicker, harder, and darker over time. By the time a dragon reaches maturity, its scales are virtually impervious to ordinary arrows, spears, and steel blades. Only heavy siege engines, such as the Dornish scorpions, stand a chance of piercing an adult dragon's hide, and even then, only at close range or through a direct strike to the eye. The scales of older dragons, like Balerion the Black Dread or Vhagar, were so dense that they could deflect almost any human weapon. However, this armor is not completely uniform. The wing membranes, made of a tough but flexible skin, remain a key point of vulnerability. During the Dance of the Dragons, many beasts were brought down when their wings were torn or shredded in mid-air combat, sending them crashing to the earth. Beyond their physical strength, the most defining and terrifying characteristic of the dragon is its ability to breathe fire. This is not a simple trick of gas or breath. It is a highly complex internal chemical process. A dragon is a creature of intense heat. Its very blood is hot enough to steam in the cold air of the north, and its body temperature is constantly boiling. Inside the dragon's throat and chest lie two specialized glands. These glands produce two distinct, highly volatile organic fluids. When a dragon prepares to strike, it forces these fluids up through its gullet. As they mix at the back of the throat and meet the rushing air, they instantly ignite. The result is not a simple puff of smoke, but a roaring torrent of liquid, superheated flame. This fire is heavy, almost like burning oil, and it clings to whatever it touches. The heat of a dragon's fire is directly linked to its age and size. A young hatchling can produce a flame hot enough to singe hair or burn wood, but it is bright orange and flickers easily. As the dragon matures, its internal furnace burns hotter. The fire of a mature dragon turns a deep, burning yellow, then white, and in the case of the oldest and largest beasts, the flames can burn a terrifying midnight black. This black fire is so intensely hot that it does not merely burn wood or melt flesh. It liquefies stone, turns sand to glass, and crumbles ancient fortresses to ash, as the ruins of Harrenhal bear witness to this very day. Unlike the beasts of the field and forest, a dragon has no natural limit to its growth. In theory, a dragon will never stop growing as long as it lives, provided it has two essential things: food and absolute freedom. This is why the dragons of ancient Valyria and the early dragons of House Targaryen reached such gargantuan sizes. Balerion was said to be large enough to swallow an aurochs whole, and his shadow could cover an entire town as he flew overhead. However, this limitless growth is easily halted by human intervention. When the Targaryens constructed the great dome of the dragon pit in King's Landing, they sought to keep their beasts secure and close at hand. This proved to be a fatal mistake. Confinement in the dark, cramped vaults of the dragon pit stunted the growth of successive generations. The dragons hatched within its stone walls grew smaller, weaker, and more fragile with each passing decade. Their wingspans shrank, and their lifespans shortened, until the last dragons of Westeros were no larger than small dogs, unable to fly or produce viable offspring. To maintain their great size, wild or free-roaming dragons require an immense amount of food. Their diet consists almost entirely of meat. Sheep, cattle, wild boars, and horses are their preferred prey. A hungry dragon is a relentless hunter, capable of sweeping down upon a herd and incinerating its meals before consuming them. Because they cook their food with their own breath before eating, their digestive systems are highly efficient, leaving very little waste. Yet, all of this physical power would be useless to mankind without the mysterious, magical bond that links a dragon to its rider. This connection is not a matter of simple training, nor can a dragon be tamed like a horse or a hound. It is a profound, blood-deep union rooted in the ancient, dark sorcery of the Valyrian freehold. Legend tells us that the first dragon lords of Valyria used blood sacrifices, magic horns, and dark spells to bind the souls of the dragons to their own bloodlines. Because of this ancient magic, only those with the blood of old Valyria can hope to claim and ride a dragon. This bloodline connection is why House Targaryen practiced sibling marriage for centuries. They sought to keep their blood pure, ensuring that the ability to command the Sky Kings would never be lost to their descendants. Those without this blood, known as flat ears or common men, who attempt to mount a dragon are almost always met with a swift and fiery death. Even the dragon seeds, the bastards of Valyrian descent, faced immense danger when trying to claim the wild beasts during the civil wars of Westeros. The rules of the dragon bond are absolute and unyielding. A dragon will only accept one rider at a time. No matter how many people try to mount a bonded beast, it will only obey the commands of the person whose soul has merged with its own. Furthermore, a dragon rider cannot claim a second dragon while their current partner still lives. This bond remains unbroken until the death of either the dragon or the rider. Only when a rider passes away can another person attempt to claim the beast. This bond is not merely a tool for steering and commanding the beast in battle. It is a deep, telepathic connection that defies simple explanation. When a rider is angry, their dragon becomes restless and aggressive. When a rider is in pain, the dragon can feel it, even across great distances. During the tragedy of the Dance of the Dragons, there were accounts of dragons roaring in agony at the exact moment their riders were slain miles away. The dragon becomes an extension of the rider's will, responding to subtle shifts in weight, low whispers in the high Valyrian tongue, and even unspoken thoughts. How this bond is sealed remains a subject of great debate among the Maesters. Some believe it is a literal blending of blood and spirit, a form of skin changing far more powerful and permanent than that practiced by the wildlings of the far north. Others suggest it is a form of mutual recognition, where the dragon recognizes the fiery spark of Valyrian magic within the human's veins. Whatever the truth, it is a bond that brings both immense power and terrible ruin. When the Targaryens rode their dragons in harmony, they united a continent and forged the Seven Kingdoms. But when the bloodlines fractured and turned against one another, the dragons followed their riders into the flames. The very bond that made them gods on earth became the tool of their destruction. As the Sky Kings tore each other apart in the clouds, the magic that sustained them began to fade from the world, leaving behind only cold bones, stone eggs, and the quiet, empty skies of Westeros. Chapter 3. The Conqueror's Beasts. Balerion, Meraxes, and Vhagar. When Aegon Targaryen looked west from the rocky citadel of Dragonstone, he did not see a fragmented land of 7 squabbling kingdoms. He saw a single empire waiting to be bound together by fire. To truly understand the rise of the Targaryen dynasty, we must look beyond the men and women who wore the crowns. We must study the terrifying biology and history of the 3 great beasts that made their conquest possible. Balerion, Meraxes, and Vhagar were not merely animals, nor were they simple weapons of war. They were ancient forces of nature, living gods of scales and fire, whose very breath reshaped the geography and history of the continent. The origins of these beasts lie in the lost glory of the Valyrian freehold. Before the doom shattered the peninsula in a cataclysm of fire and ash, the Targaryens fled to the rocky island of Dragonstone, bringing 5 dragons with them. Of those 5 original beasts, only one survived to see the conquest. This was Balerion, the eldest and most formidable of the trio. The other 2, Meraxes and Vhagar, were hatched on Dragonstone itself, from eggs saved from the ruins of their ancestral home. Together, these 3 dragons formed a perfect trifecta of aerial supremacy, representing different stages of growth, different temperaments, and different methods of destruction. Let us first examine Balerion, whom history remembers as the Black Dread. Ridden by Aegon the Conqueror himself, Balerion was the largest dragon ever recorded in the history of Westeros, and indeed the entire world after the fall of Valyria. His scales were as black as coal. His wingspan was so vast that it could cast whole towns into shadow as he flew overhead, and his teeth were as long and sharp as swords. Most terrifying of all was his fire. Unlike the orange and yellow flames of lesser beasts, Balerion's fire was as dark as his scales, sometimes described as a pitch-black blaze with flickers of red. This flame was so intensely hot that it did not merely burn wood and flesh, it could liquefy stone, melt iron, and turn sand into glass. Anatomically, Balerion was a marvel of ancient Valyrian biology. By the time of the conquest, he was already over a century old, and dragons, as the Maesters know, never stop growing as long as they live and have room to fly. His jaw was so immense that he could swallow a whole mammoth or an aurochs in a single bite. His bones were light but incredibly strong, filled with air pockets like those of a bird, yet reinforced by a dense, mineral-rich matrix that could withstand the incredible pressures of high-altitude flight and the impact of heavy weapons. His hide was thick and hardened like armor, impervious to ordinary arrows and spears. To look upon Balerion was to look upon the absolute peak of dragon evolution, a creature designed for total domination Balerion's physical power was demonstrated most famously at the siege of Harrenhal. King Harren the Black believed his massive stone fortress was impregnable. Its walls were thicker than any other castle in the realm, and its towers reached high into the sky. But Harren's defensive theories were built for ground warfare, not for the horror of the Black Dread. Aegon rode Balerion high above the reach of the castle's archers, then dove straight down into the heart of the fortress. Balerion unleashed his black fire upon the towers. The stone did not hold. It glowed red, then melted like wax. The heat was so extreme that King Harren and his sons were roasted alive inside their own walls, and the towers of Harrenhal were left twisted and deformed, a permanent testament to the power of the Black Dread. While Balerion was the ultimate weapon of terror, Meraxes was a creature of singular beauty and devastating grace. Ridden by Queen Rhaenys Targaryen, Meraxes was the second largest of the three dragons during the conquest. She was a female beast, covered in shimmering silver scales that shone brightly under the sun, and she had striking golden eyes. Meraxes was older and larger than Vhagar at this time, and she possessed a fierce, aggressive temperament. Her jaw was wide enough to swallow a horse whole, and her flight was said to be faster and more agile than that of her massive brother Balerion. Rhaenys loved flying more than her siblings, and she spent more time in the air on Meraxes than Aegon and Visenya did on their own beasts. Meraxes proved her terrifying worth during the War of Conquest, particularly at the Battle of the Last Storm and the Field of Fire. In the wet forests of the Stormlands, she flew through howling winds and heavy rain to rain fire down upon the stubborn hosts of King Argilac the Arrogant, but it was on the grassy plains of the Reach that Meraxes joined her siblings to unleash the full, combined fury of their species. On the Field of Fire, all three dragons were unleashed at once for the first and only time. Together, Balerion, Meraxes, and Vhagar created a literal wall of flame that swept across the dry grasslands. Over 4,000 men were burned to ash in a matter of hours, and the power of the old kings of the Reach and the Westerlands was broken forever. Yet, despite her magnificent power, Meraxes was destined to show the world that dragons are not immortal. During the First Dornish War, Queen Rhaenys flew Meraxes deep into the desert sands of Dorne, hoping to force the stubborn lords to submit. But the Dornishmen did not fight on open battlefields. They hid in the hills and used guerrilla tactics. At the castle of Hellholt, a defender operating a massive iron shooting machine, known as a Scorpion, aimed a heavy iron bolt at the sky. Through a combination of luck and skill, the bolt struck Meraxes directly in her golden eye. The giant silver beast shrieked in agony, thrashing in the air before crashing heavily to the earth. The impact crushed the castle walls and killed both the dragon and Queen Rhaenys, proving that even the most beautiful and terrifying beasts could be brought down by a single, well-placed weapon. The third of the great conquerors was Vhagar, ridden by Queen Visenya Targaryen. During the conquest, Vhagar was the youngest and smallest of the three dragons, though smallest is a relative term, as she was still large enough to dwarf any horse or ship. Vhagar's scales were bronze, decorated with greenish-blue highlights, and her fire burned with a fierce, blinding heat. Visenya was a warrior queen, stern and solemn, and Vhagar's personality reflected her rider. The dragon was known for her fierce loyalty and her terrifying roar, which was said to shake the foundations of castles. Vhagar played a crucial role in securing the northern borders of the new kingdom. While Aegon marched west, Visenya flew Vhagar to the Vale of Arryn. The Arryns had retreated to the Eyrie, an impregnable castle built high on a mountain peak, believing no army could ever reach them. Visenya did not bother to climb the mountain path. She simply rode Vhagar over the stone walls and landed directly in the inner courtyard. When the regent of the Vale came out, she found her young son sitting on Visenya's lap, looking up at the massive bronze dragon in wonder. The boy asked if he could ride the dragon, and his mother, realizing the futility of resistance, surrendered her crown without a drop of blood being spilled. Unlike her sister Meraxes, Vhagar survived the conquest, and went on to live a remarkably long life. As the decades passed, Vhagar continued to grow. By the time of the Great Targaryen Civil War, known as the Dance of the Dragons, Vhagar was nearly 200 years old. She had outlived all her original contemporaries, including Balerion. In her old age, she had grown to be almost as large as the Black Dread had been during the conquest. Her hide was so thick and scarred that she was practically invulnerable, and her roar was like thunder. However, her immense size also made her slow and heavy on the ground. She required massive amounts of food, often swallowing whole cattle and sheep, and she spent much of her time sleeping in deep caverns or remote valleys when not summoned to war. Vhagar's ultimate fate was as dramatic as her long life. Ridden in her final years by the fierce Prince Aemond Targaryen, she met her end in a legendary duel above the lake known as the God's Eye. There, she fought Meraxes, the bloodworm, ridden by Prince Daemon Targaryen. Though Vhagar was twice the size of her opponent, Meraxes was younger, faster, and incredibly vicious. The two beasts tore into each other in the sky, their teeth sinking into scales and wings, while their flames lit up the clouds. In a final desperate move, Daemon leaped from his saddle to drive his sword through Aemon's eye, just as the locked dragons crashed into the deep waters below. Neither dragon survived the impact, marking the end of the last living connection to Aegon's conquest. The ecological and political impact of these three beasts cannot be overstated. Before their arrival, Westeros was a land of constant, bloody wars between rival kings. The dragons changed the very nature of power by centralizing absolute destructive capability in the hands of a single family. They forced the Seven Kingdoms to unite under a single rule. The Iron Throne itself was forged from the melted swords of Aegon's defeated enemies, heated and twisted by the black fire of Balerion. Without the dragons, the throne would be nothing but a collection of cold steel. With them, it became the ultimate symbol of royal authority, backed by the threat of total devastation from the skies. Even in death, the Conqueror's beasts continued to hold sway over the minds of men. The massive skulls of Balerion, Meraxes, and Vhagar were preserved by the Targaryen kings and displayed in the throne room of the Red Keep. Visitors from across the world would look up at the empty eye sockets of the Black Dread and the silver sheen of Meraxes' remaining bones, feeling a deep, instinctual terror. These skulls served as a silent warning to any lord who dared to dream of rebellion. They were a reminder that the peace of the realm was built on a foundation of ash, and that the crown's authority was born from the bellies of monsters. Ultimately, the story of Balerion, Meraxes, and Vhagar is a story of how magic and biology combine to shape human history. These three dragons were the true architects of the Seven Kingdoms. They tore down ancient walls, turned great armies to dust, and lifted a minor noble family from Valyria to the heights of absolute power. Though they have long since passed into legend, their shadows still hang over Westeros. For as long as the Iron Throne stands, the realm will remember the terrible beauty and the absolute ruin brought by the Conqueror's beasts. Chapter 4: The Doom of Fire. How the Dragons Perished. For generations, the skies of Westeros belonged to the dragons. These massive, fire-breathing beasts were not merely weapons of war. They were the very heart of Targaryen power and the physical anchors of magic in the world. When a dragon flew, the air grew warm, and the ancient laws of nature seemed to bend. Yet, the greatest tragedy of this majestic species is that they did not fall to some great plague, nor were they defeated by a foreign empire. They were destroyed by the very family that claimed to love them. The civil war known as the Dance of the Dragons was a self-inflicted wound from which the realm would never truly recover. It was a catastrophe of fire and blood that tore the skies apart and brought about the slow, cold death of magic itself. To understand how these creatures perished, one must understand their biology. A dragon is a creature of pure heat. Their blood runs so hot that their bodies steam in the winter rain. They grow continuously throughout their lives, provided they have enough food and space to fly. Before the war, there were over 20 living dragons in Westeros. Some, like the ancient Vhagar, were living mountains of leather and teeth, survivors of Aegon the Conqueror's wars. Others were young, swift, and full of energy, but a dragon's scale is nearly impenetrable to arrows and spears, and their fire can melt stone. In the history of the world, only one thing had ever consistently killed a dragon: another dragon. When Targaryen turned on Targaryen, they turned their ultimate weapons against each other, setting off a chain reaction of extinction. The first major clash of the war set a grim tone for what was to come. At Shipbreaker Bay, young Prince Lucerys Valerian and his small dragon Arrax were pursued through a terrible storm by his cousin Aemond Targaryen, who rode the colossal Vhagar. It was not a fair fight. Vhagar was more than 5 times the size of Arrax. In the howling wind and rain, Vhagar easily tore the smaller dragon apart, sending his broken body plunging into the sea. This was the first blood spilled in the sky, and it proved that the bond between dragon and rider could not prevent terrible tragedies. The ancient rules of hospitality and family were burned away in an instant. As the war intensified, the battles grew larger and more desperate. At Rook's Rest, the majestic red dragon Meleys, known as the Red Queen, was ambushed by 2 enemy beasts, the Golden Sunfire and the massive Vhagar. Meleys fought with terrifying fury. She was one of the fastest dragons in the realm, and she managed to lock her jaws around Sunfire's neck, nearly tearing him apart. But Vhagar's immense weight crushed them both to the ground. In the end, Meleys was ripped to pieces, her body burning on the forest floor. Sunfire survived, but he was horribly crippled, his wing half torn from his body. He would spend the rest of his short life in agony, a broken symbol of a dying dynasty. The peak of this aerial devastation occurred high above the waters of the God's Eye. There, 2 of the most formidable warriors of House Targaryen met for a final duel. Prince Daemon Targaryen rode Meraxes, the bloodworm, a lean red beast of unmatched aggression. Prince Aemond rode Vhagar. The clash was a spectacle of absolute horror. The 2 dragons tore at each other's wings and throats as they plummeted toward the lake. Caraxes locked his jaws around Vhagar's neck, ripping open her throat, while Vhagar's massive claws tore open Carax's belly. In their final moments, as the beasts screamed and fell, Daemon leaped from his saddle. He drove his Valyrian steel sword, Dark Sister, straight through Aemond's empty eye socket. A second later, both dragons and their riders hit the water with the force of an explosion. Neither beast would ever fly again. While the skies saw magnificent and terrible duels, the final, fatal blow to the dragons did not happen in the clouds. It happened on the ground, in the heart of King's Landing. As the war dragged on, the capital city descended into chaos. The small folk were starving, terrified and angry. They looked up at the sky and saw only doom. A mad, one-handed street preacher known as the Shepherd began to speak to the desperate crowds. He told them that the dragons were demons, the source of all their misery, and that the city would never know peace until the beasts were dead. Driven by fear and religious frenzy, tens of thousands of common citizens marched on the Dragon Pit. The Dragon Pit was a colossal stone fortress built atop Rhaenys' Hill, designed specifically to house the royal mounts. On that fateful night, 4 dragons were chained inside its dark, cavernous chambers: Shrykos, Morgul, Tyraxes, and Dreamfire. These dragons were trapped, unable to fly or use their speed to escape. What followed was a slaughter of unimaginable scale. The mob rushed the bronze doors, pouring into the pit like a wave of angry ants. The dragons fought back with everything they had. They breathed torrents of fire, turning hundreds of attackers into ash in seconds. But for every man that burned, 10 more leaped forward. Shrykos and Morgul, young and bound by heavy iron chains, were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Men used spears, axes, and heavy iron bars to hack at the beasts' soft underbellies and eyes. Tyraxes, choking on the smoke of his own fire, was cornered and slain in his den. The largest dragon inside the pit was Dreamfire, She managed to break her chains and took to the air inside the great stone hall. She swept low, burning thousands of rioters, but the space was too confined. Arrows and spears rained down on her from the upper galleries. In her pain and fury, Dreamfire flew straight up, crashing into the massive stone dome of the dragon pit. The ceiling shattered, tons of heavy stone and mortar collapsed inward, crushing Dreamfire and burying her beneath the ruins, along with the thousands of people who had come to kill her. Outside the pit, Queen Rhaenyra's own dragon, Syrax, was chained in the courtyard of the Red Keep. Hearing the screams of her dying kin, Syrax broke free and flew toward the burning hill. Rather than staying safely in the air and raining fire from above, Syrax descended into the ruins to fight the mob on the ground. It was a fatal mistake. Surrounded by thousands of fanatical killers, the great yellow dragon was hacked to death. By the time the sun rose, the dragon pit was a smoking, ruined graveyard of stone and bone. The age of dragons had been shattered in a single night of human madness. When the war finally ended, the world was a much quieter and colder place. Almost all of the mature, powerful dragons were dead. Only a few hatchlings and wild dragons remained, but they did not thrive. The dragons born after the war were weak, sickly and deformed. They grew slower, and their wings were often too small or withered to lift their heavy bodies. The Targaryens tried desperately to hatch new eggs, but without the strong presence of magic and the proper knowledge, the eggs remained cold, hard stones. The final dragon died during the reign of King Aegon III, who was fittingly called the Dragonbane. As a child, Aegon had watched his mother being eaten alive by his uncle's dragon, and he carried a deep, lifelong hatred of the beasts. Under his watch, the last dragon, a small, green, sickly female with withered wings, breathed her last breath in the year 153 after Aegon's conquest. She left behind a clutch of cold eggs that would never hatch. The death of the dragons was not just the loss of a species, it was the death of magic in the known world. Archmaesters and scholars have long noted that after the last dragon died, the winters in Westeros grew longer, darker, and more severe. The summers became unpredictable. In the city of King's Landing, the pyromancers of the Alchemists Guild found that their spells for creating wildfire grew weaker and far more difficult to perform. The magical glass candles of Old Town, made of obsidian, which once burned with a strange, sour light when touched by sorcery, grew dark and cold. Without the fire of the dragons, the world lost its colour. The great houses no longer feared the wrath of the crown, and the Targaryens were forced to rely on political alliances rather than the absolute power of their beasts. The great beasts were gone, leaving behind only massive skulls to decorate the halls of the Red Keep, silent reminders of a time when humanity shared the world with gods of fire. The doom of the dragons was a tragedy of human greed, a harsh lesson that the greatest power in the world is also the most fragile when turned against itself. Chapter 5. The Others. Origins and Nature of the White Walkers. For thousands of years, the Masters of the Citadel have gathered knowledge, writing down the history of kings, the movement of the stars, and the behavior of beasts. Yet, there is a shadow at the very edge of our maps, a cold silence that we have long refused to look at. We spoke of the far north as a place of empty ice and wild men, dismissing the older stories as nursery tales designed to frighten children. But the ancient texts do not lie. Deep in the lands of always winter, there exists a threat that is older than the Seven Kingdoms, older than the Andal invasion, and perhaps older than humanity itself. These are the Others, known in the common tongue as the White Walkers. They are not merely beasts, nor are they dead men. They are a different kind of life, born from the deepest dark of the world, and shaped by a magic that defies the natural order. To understand what these creatures are, we must look back to the dawn of history, to a time when the first men crossed the Arm of Dawn and began to settle in Westeros. The first men brought bronze swords, horses, and a hunger for land. They cut down the sacred weirwood trees to build their holdfasts and farms, sparking a war with the original inhabitants of this continent, the Children of the Forest. The children were small, magical beings who lived in harmony with the trees and the earth. They fought bravely, using their green magic to flood lands and shatter land bridges, but they could not stop the relentless advance of the larger, stronger humans. As the centuries of war wore on, the Children of the Forest grew desperate. They were facing total destruction. In their desperation, they turned to a dark and dangerous form of magic, twisting the power of the earth to create a weapon that could save them. Ancient legends and fragmented memories tell us of a secret ritual performed deep in the northern forests. The children captured a warrior of the first men and bound him to a sacred weirwood tree, using a dagger made of dragon glass, the very volcanic stone they used for their weapons. They pierced the man's chest, pushing the dark stone directly into his heart. The magic of the dragon glass did not kill the man. Instead, it froze his blood, turned his skin pale, and filled his eyes with a burning, unnatural blue light. The magic of the trees and the earth was corrupted, transforming this human captive into the very first White Walker, a being of pure winter. He was designed to be a weapon, an unstoppable force that would protect the children of the forest by wiping out the human invaders. But the children made a terrible mistake. They created a force they could not control. The weapon they made to destroy their enemies soon turned on everyone, bringing a night that lasted a generation. The biology of a White Walker is unlike anything else in the known world. They are not living beings of flesh and blood, but they are also not rotting corpses. They are made of ice, magic, and ancient malice. Observers who have encountered them describe them as tall, gaunt, and hard as old bones. Their skin is pale as milk, almost translucent, as if they are made of compacted snow. When they move, they do so with a strange fluid grace that seems impossible for creatures of their size. They do not trudge through the deep snows of the north. Instead, they walk lightly upon the drifts, leaving no footprints behind. The most striking feature of a White Walker is their eyes. They do not possess normal human eyes, but rather 2 points of brilliant, burning sapphire light. This blue light is not just a visual trait. It is the physical manifestation of the dark magic that keeps them alive. It is the cold flame of their life force. When a White Walker is destroyed, this light instantly goes out, leaving behind nothing but rapidly melting water. The cold that surrounds these creatures is not merely a result of the northern weather. It is an aura that they carry with them. Wherever a White Walker travels, the temperature drops instantly, freezing the moisture in the air and causing the ground to crack. This extreme cold is so intense that it acts as a weapon in itself. It can snuff out small campfires, freeze the breath in a man's lungs, and make iron weapons too cold to touch without burning the skin. Their armor and weaponry also reflect this mastery of ice. A White Walker does not wear heavy steel plates or boiled leather. Instead, they wear a unique type of armor that appears to be made of crystalline ice. This armor is semi-transparent and seems to shift in color as they move, reflecting the snowy landscape around them. This acts as a highly effective form of camouflage, making them almost invisible in a blizzard until they are right upon their prey. Their swords are even more remarkable. These weapons are not forged in fire, they are grown from ice. They are long, thin blades of pale blue crystal that glow with a faint cold light. Although they look fragile, like icicles, they are harder than any steel forged by human hands. When a steel sword strikes the blade of a White Walker, the extreme cold of the crystal weapon instantly transfers to the metal. Within seconds, the human sword becomes brittle and shatters into 1,000 pieces, leaving the defender helpless. But the most terrifying aspect of the White Walkers is not their physical strength or their icy weapons. It is their dark magic. They are masters of necromancy, the art of raising and controlling the dead. When a living creature dies in the cold of the north, the White Walkers can claim its body. With a wave of their hands, they can animate the corpse, turning it into a white, There is a vital distinction between a White Walker and a Wight. A White Walker is an intelligent, independent being with its own will, language and culture. A Wight is merely a puppet, a lifeless shell controlled by the mind of its master. The Wights do not feel pain, they do not tire, and they do not stop until they are physically destroyed. Their eyes, too, burn with the same icy blue light, showing that they are bound to the magic of the Walkers. This necromancy allows the White Walkers to grow their army with every battle they win, turning their enemies' fallen brothers into new soldiers for the dead. We must also ask how the White Walkers maintain their numbers. They do not seem to reproduce in the way humans or beasts do. Instead, they rely on a darker, more intimate form of magic to create new members of their species. Throughout history, certain desperate humans living beyond the wall have made pacts with the cold gods. The most famous example is Craster, a wildling who offered his newborn sons to the forest. When a male infant was left in the deep woods, the White Walkers would not kill it. Instead, they would carry the child deep into the lands of always winter, to an altar of ancient ice. There, a White Walker would touch the baby's face with a single, frozen fingernail. This touch would instantly freeze the child's heart, turning its skin pale and turning its eyes into those familiar burning blue stars. Through this terrible process, a human child is transformed into a new White Walker, ensuring their species survives across the millennia. For thousands of years, the wall has stood as a barrier against this nightmare. Built with stone, earth, and ancient spells, it was designed to keep the cold at bay. But magic is a swinging pendulum. As the winters grow longer and the dragons return to the world, the magic of the deep north is waking up once more. The White Walkers are not a myth from a forgotten age. They are a living, breathing weapon of war, created out of desperation and fueled by an endless winter. And if the world of men cannot remember how to fight them, the cold will sweep south, and the long night will begin again, this time forever. Chapter 6. The Pale Horde, Wights, Giants, and Ice Spiders. To study the frozen wastes beyond the wall is to study a landscape where the natural laws of life and death no longer apply. In the warm valleys of the Reach or the humid marshes of the Neck, death is a quiet end. The flesh rots, returning its energy to the soil to feed the crops and the trees. But in the extreme cold of the true north, death is not an ending. It is a state of waiting. The cold does not merely preserve the dead, it prepares them. When the cold winds rise and the shadows of the White Walkers draw near, the dead rise. They become the Pale Horde, an army of reanimated thralls known to the brothers of the Night's Watch simply as Wights. To understand the biology of a Wight, one must first dismiss the common misconceptions about rot and decay. A Wight is not a typical corpse. When a human or an animal dies in the far north and is touched by the magic of the Great Other, a profound physical transformation takes place. The first and most striking change is in the eyes. The pupils and irises dissolve into a brilliant, glowing blue, shining like cold stars in the deepest night. This blue light is not a reflection. It is the physical manifestation of the foreign magic that now animates the dead tissue. The second major change is the pooling and freezing of the blood. Without a heartbeat, the blood settles into the lowest parts of the body, eventually turning the hands and feet a deep, bruised black. This is why the wildlings and the rangers speak of the black hands of the dead. The flesh itself becomes cold to the touch, resembling hard leather or frozen wood. They do not breathe, their lungs are still, and their hearts are silent, yet they move with a dark, purposeful energy. This lack of biological function makes the common wight an incredibly durable soldier. Traditional weapons of iron and steel, which would easily slay a living man, do little to stop a corpse. A sword thrust through the heart of a wight does not cause blood loss because there is no blood pressure. A spear through the lungs does not cause suffocation because they do not require oxygen. Even decapitation, the surest way to end a living foe, is not entirely effective. Historical records from the Night's Watch describe severed heads that continue to bite and detached hands that crawl across the snow like giant pale spiders, seeking throat to choke or eyes to gouge. The only true weakness of these reanimated thralls is fire. The dry, frozen flesh of a wight catches fire with terrifying speed, burning as if it were soaked in oil. It is believed that the magic holding the corpse together is highly sensitive to heat, and when the physical body is consumed by flames, the binding spell is broken. While dragon glass and Valyrian steel are legendary for their ability to shatter the White Walkers themselves, they do not have the same instant effect on common wights unless the blow is physically destructive enough to dismember them. To defeat the Horde, one must bring fire. While the common human wights make up the bulk of this pale army, they are far from the only creatures raised by the cold. The magic of the White Walkers does not discriminate between species. Any living thing that dies in the cold can be turned into a weapon. This includes the great beasts of the north, such as direwolves, shadowcats, and even massive snow bears. But the most tragic and terrifying of these reanimated beasts are the giant wights. In life, the giants were a peaceful, if isolationist people. They lived in harmony with the great mammoths of the tundra, speaking their own ancient tongue and avoiding the wars of men. But when the long night falls, their massive size makes them prime targets for the pale horde. A single giant wight possesses the strength of dozens of men. Their bones, thick as tree trunks, and their dense muscles do not lose their power in death. Reanimated by the cold, a giant wight becomes a living siege engine. They can tear through heavy wooden gates, shatter stone walls with their bare hands, and trample entire ranks of soldiers without feeling a single blow. The tragedy of seeing such ancient, majestic creatures reduced to mindless, blue-eyed monsters is a testament to the cruelty of the Great Other. Perhaps the most mysterious and debated creatures in the entire bestiary of the North are the legendary ice spiders. For thousands of years, scholars in Old Town dismissed these creatures as mere fairy tales, stories told by wet nurses to frighten young children. Old Nan of Winterfell famously spoke of the White Walkers hunting with packs of pale spiders, as big as hounds. For a long time, the Maesters believed these stories were wild exaggerations, perhaps misidentified wolves, or simply a metaphor for the creeping, multi-legged advance of the frost. However, ancient texts from the Age of Heroes and the scattered reports of the Night's Watch suggest a different, more chilling reality. The ice spiders may indeed exist, or at least they once did during the first long night. If we look at these creatures through a scientific lens, we must ask how such beasts could survive in the extreme cold. True spiders are cold-blooded creatures, relying on the warmth of their environment to move and hunt. In the deep sub-zero temperatures of the far north, a normal giant spider would freeze solid in minutes. Therefore, if the ice spiders are real, they must be highly adapted, or, more likely, they are magical constructs. Some older maesters have suggested that the ice spiders are not living arachnids at all, but rather reanimated carcasses of ancient extinct mountain spiders that once lived in the deep caverns of the Frostfangs. Others believe they are made of pure ice and magic, created by the White Walkers in the same way they fashion their armor and weapons from frozen water. According to the legends, these spiders are pale, almost translucent, allowing them to blend perfectly with the snow and ice. They do not spin webs of silk to catch flies. Instead, they hunt active prey, moving with absolute silence across the deepest snowdrifts. Their multiple legs allow them to climb vertical ice walls and steep cliffs with ease, making them excellent scouts and flankers for the White Walkers. Some tales even claim that the walkers themselves ride these giant spiders into battle, using them to scale the defensive walls of their enemies. The venom of an ice spider is said to be so cold that it instantly freezes the blood of its victim, turning them into a statue of ice before they can even scream. What makes the Pale Horde so terrifying is not just their physical strength or their immunity to pain, but the complete absence of free will. They do not fight for glory, gold, or survival. They are completely subservient to the will of their creators, the White Walkers. It is believed that the Walkers control the Wights through a highly powerful and corrupted form of skin changing. Just as a warg can project their mind into a wolf or an eagle, the White Walkers can project their cold will into hundreds, perhaps thousands of dead bodies at once. This collective mind gives the Pale Horde a frightening level of coordination. They do not hesitate, they do not retreat, and they do not feel fear. They move as a single, devastating wave, driven only by the desire to extinguish all life and warmth from the world. When a White Walker is slain, the magic connecting them to their thralls is instantly shattered, and the Wights they controlled collapse back into harmless, still corpses. This is the ultimate weakness of the Horde. They are entirely dependent on their masters. The ecological impact of this Pale Horde is devastating. Wherever they go, they bring the cold with them, or perhaps the cold brings them. They leave nothing but barren, frozen wasteland in their wake. They do not consume food, meaning they have no need for crops or livestock, but they destroy everything that lives, ensuring that no life can return to the lands they conquer. They are the ultimate agents of winter, a physical manifestation of the end of the world. As we look back at the history of the Wall, we must realize that it was not built simply to keep out the wildlings. The Wall is a magical shield, built with ancient spells woven into the ice by the children of the forest and the first men. It was built to stand as a barrier against the Pale Horde, a line of defense to keep the cold, dead world of the north from consuming the warm, living kingdoms of the south. For as long as the Wall stands, the living may sleep in peace. But we must never forget the horrors that wait in the dark, hungry for the warmth of our fires and the blood in our veins. Chapter 7. Guardians of the North, the Direwolves of House Stark. For thousands of years, the people of the Seven Kingdoms have looked to the sigils of the great houses as mere symbols. The Lion of Lannister, the Stag of Baratheon, and the Dragon of Targaryen are painted on banners and carved into stone to represent power, pride, and history. But in the cold and ancient north, the sigil of House Stark is something far more real. The direwolf is not just a drawing on a grey banner. It is a living, breathing relic of a primal age, a predator that once ruled the vast forests of Westeros alongside the first men. To the people of the south, the direwolf is nothing more than a myth, a creature from scary stories told to children by their wet nurses. Before the events that shook the Seven Kingdoms, no direwolf had been seen south of the Wall for over 200 years. The rise of human kingdoms, the clearing of ancient woods, and centuries of hunting pushed these great beasts far into the frozen wilderness. Only in the dense, silent depths of the haunted forest, beyond the reach of the King's Road, did they continue to hunt in the shadows of the trees. Yet, the history of the North is bound to these creatures. When the first men came to Westeros, they found a land dominated by magic and giant beasts. The direwolf was chief among the predators of the forest. While ordinary grey wolves hunted in cooperative packs, the direwolf operated on an entirely different scale of power. It was an apex predator, built to survive the harshest winters. It was only natural that the ancient kings of winter, the ancestors of House Stark, chose this magnificent beast to represent their line. They recognized that to survive in the north, one had to be as resilient, as fierce, and as loyal to the pack as the direwolf. To understand the dread these animals inspire, one must look closely at their physical form. A common grey wolf is already a dangerous animal, but a fully grown direwolf is a monster by comparison. They do not simply look like larger wolves. Their proportions are distinct and built for extreme violence. A direwolf's head is much larger in proportion to its body, featuring a broad skull and a thick, muscular neck designed to absorb the shock of bringing down massive prey like elk or mammoths. Their legs are longer and leaner, allowing them to run at incredible speeds over deep snow without sinking. As they grow, their size quickly surpasses that of any ordinary hound. A mature direwolf can reach the size of a pony, with its shoulders level with the chest of a grown man. They can easily weigh several hundred pounds, yet they move with a ghostly silence that defies their massive bulk. Their jaws are their most lethal weapon. A direwolf's teeth are longer and sharper than those of a common wolf, and their bite force is strong enough to crush bone, snap a man's arm at the elbow, or tear a throat clean out in a single bite. Their fur is thick and double-layered, protecting them from the freezing winds of the true north, and providing a natural armor against the claws of rival predators. But physical strength is only part of what makes the direwolf so formidable. They possess a supernatural intelligence that separates them from ordinary beasts. A direwolf does not merely react on instinct. They can read human emotions, sense hidden danger long before it arrives, and judge a person's true character with uncanny accuracy. In battle, they do not fight like wild dogs. They display a terrifying tactical awareness, targeting leaders, protecting their companions' exposed flanks, and coordinating their attacks with human warriors. This intelligence suggests a deeper, magical nature, one that is tied to the ancient, forgotten forces of the old gods. This magical nature became undeniable when 6 direwolf pups were found near Winterfell, huddled beside the body of their dead mother. The mother had been killed by a broken antler of a stag, a dark omen that foreshadowed the tragic fate of Ned Stark and King Robert Baratheon. There were 6 pups in total, matching the number of Eddard Stark's children, including his bastard son Jon Snow. This was no random event. It was a sign that the old magic of the North was waking up, binding the destiny of House Stark to these ancient guardians. The connection between each Stark child and their direwolf went far beyond that of a master and a pet. It was a spiritual bond, a mental bridge known in northern lore as skin-changing or warging. Though some of the children did not understand it at first, they were able to slip into the minds of their wolves during their sleep, experiencing the world through the beast's senses. They smelled the copper scent of blood on the wind, felt the cold snow beneath their paws, and ran through the dark forests of the north while their human bodies lay asleep in bed. This bond also meant that the personalities of the wolves perfectly mirrored the traits and fates of their human partners. Sansa Stark's wolf, named Lady, was the smallest and gentlest of the litter. She was trusting, well-behaved and beautiful, reflecting Sansa's early dreams of high-born ladyhood and courtly life. When Lady was unjustly executed south of the Wall, it marked the end of Sansa's innocence. The loss of her wolf left Sansa vulnerable, cut off from the protective magic of her family, forcing her to survive the dangerous political games of King's Landing on her own. In stark contrast was Nymeria, the wolf of Arya Stark. Named after a legendary warrior queen, Nymeria was wild, fierce, and fiercely independent, much like Arya herself. When Arya was forced to send Nymeria away into the wild to save her from the Lannisters, the wolf did not perish. Instead, she thrived. Nymeria gathered a massive pack of hundreds of ordinary wolves, dominating the riverlands and hunting those who preyed on the weak, even separated by hundreds of leagues. Arya's connection to Nymeria remained, as she dreamed of leading the great pack, keeping her wild Stark identity alive, even while she trained as a faceless assassin. Robb Stark's wolf, Grey Wind, was a creature of pure fury and military discipline. On the battlefield, Grey Wind was a terror to Robb's enemies, scouting ahead, frightening enemy horses, and tearing through Lannister soldiers. The enemies of the young wolf whispered that Robb could transform into a beast himself, a rumor born from the seamless coordination between the young commander and his direwolf. Grey Wind's ultimate tragedy was that he sensed the betrayal at the Red Wedding long before it happened, growling at the phrase, but his warnings were ignored by those who trusted in guest right. For young Rickon Stark, his wolf Shaggy Dog became a physical manifestation of his fear and wild anger. As a child abandoned during a time of war, Rickon grew wild and undisciplined, and Shaggy Dog grew with the same chaotic fury. Shaggy Dog's fur was pitch black, his eyes gleamed like green fire, and he was the most aggressive of all the siblings, quick to snap and bite at anyone who came too close. Summer, the companion of Bran Stark, played perhaps the most critical role in the survival of the world. Summer's name was a promise of hope against the coming winter, and his bond with Bran was the deepest of all. When Bran was pushed from the tower and left crippled, it was Summer who saved him from an assassin, and it was through Summer that Bran first learned to use his abilities as a skin changer. Summer became Bran's legs, allowing him to run, hunt, and survive in the frozen wastes beyond the wall as they sought out the three-eyed raven. Finally, there is Ghost, the albino wolf of Jon Snow. Born as the runt of the litter, Ghost was silent, never uttering a single growl or howl. With his white fur and red eyes, he resembled the weirwood trees of the old gods, a quiet watcher of the world. Ghost's differences mirrored Jon's status as an outsider, a bastard who had to find his own way in the world. Despite being the smallest at birth, Ghost eventually grew to be the largest of all the wolves, a silent protector who stood by Jon through the hardships of the Night's Watch, the battles with wildlings, and the terrifying encounter with the dead. The story of the Direwolves is the story of House Stark itself. As long as the wolves ran with the children, the Starks held a piece of the ancient protective magic of the first men. When the wolves were killed or separated, tragedy followed. These great beasts were more than just weapons or companions. They were the physical guardians of the North, a reminder that winter is always coming, and that when the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. Chapter 8. The First Men's Allies. Giants and Mammoth Cavalry. Long before the first human feet stepped onto the shores of Westeros, the land belonged to others. In the ancient era known as the Dawn Age, two primary races ruled the continent. These were the mysterious Children of the Forest and the mighty giants. Today, the people of the Seven Kingdoms view these creatures as mere bedtime stories, meant to frighten children or entertain drunken travelers in taverns. But to a true scholar of history, the giants were as real as the stones of Winterfell. They were not monsters from a nightmare. They were a highly successful, peaceful, and deeply ancient race that once walked the length of our world. Ancient records and physical evidence show that giants once lived across the entire continent of Westeros. Maesters have found giant bones in the sunny hills of the Westerlands and within the deep cavern systems of Casterly Rock. Legends in the Reach speak of Garth Greenhand interacting with them, and ancient graves in the Red Mountains of Dawn suggest they once roamed the far south. Even across the narrow sea, in the high mountains of Essos, there are whispers of a related race of stone giants. For thousands of years, these massive beings lived in harmony with the natural world, moving with the seasons and leaving little mark upon the earth they trod. To understand the giants, we must first look at their physical form. They were not simply oversized humans, but a distinct branch of life. An adult giant typically stood between 10 and 14 feet tall. Their bodies were built for extreme strength and survival in harsh climates. Unlike humans, who have very little body hair, giants were covered in a thick, shaggy coat of dark fur. This pelt was much thicker below the waist than above, providing natural insulation against the biting winds of the north. As a giant aged, this fur would slowly turn grey and white, much like the hair of an old man. The skeleton of a giant reveals how different they were from mankind. Their heads did not sit directly above their shoulders. Instead, their skulls were thrust forward from their shoulder blades, supported by massive, heavily developed back and neck muscles. This gave them a slightly slouched, ape-like appearance. Their faces were flat and squashed, with thick eyebrows and small, deep-set eyes protected by folds of tough, horny flesh. They had wide, square teeth, perfect for grinding up tough plant matter, roots and tree bark. A giant's limbs were disproportionately long and powerful. Their arms hung much lower than a human's, reaching down past their knees. In contrast, their legs were relatively short and incredibly thick. This physical structure meant they were not built for running long distances, but they possessed unmatched stability and short bursts of explosive power. Their feet were broad, flat, and covered in a thick, calloused skin that was as hard as horn. Because of this natural protection, giants never wore shoes or boots, even when walking over jagged rocks or through freezing snow. While giants possessed immense physical power, they also had notable weaknesses. Their eyesight was remarkably poor. Their small eyes could not see details at a distance, making them vulnerable to ranged attacks from human archers. To compensate for this, they had an incredibly keen sense of smell. A giant would constantly snuffle and sniff the air, reading the scents of the wind to identify predators, prey, or approaching enemies. They could smell a human or a beast long before they could see them. In terms of diet, giants were largely vegetarians, though some tales suggest they would eat meat when plant food was scarce. They spent much of their day gathering roots, wild berries, nuts, and the bark of ancient trees. Their massive size required a constant intake of calories, which was difficult to maintain in the freezing wastes of the far north. They did not farm or cultivate crops. Instead, they lived as gatherers, moving from one valley to another to avoid exhausting the local plant life. This gentle lifestyle meant they rarely came into conflict with other species over food, as long as the forests remained vast and untouched. The culture of the giants was simple, peaceful, and entirely devoid of the political greed that plagues the kingdoms of men. Giants did not have kings, lords, or laws. They did not build stone castles or wooden huts. Instead, they preferred to live in natural caverns, deep caves, or simple shelters beneath the branches of massive trees. They lived in small family groups, and while they recognized great warriors among them, they had no formal rulers. They resolved disputes through physical contests or simple agreement, avoiding the bloody civil wars that define human history. Despite their lack of written records, the giants were not mindless beasts. They spoke the old tongue, the ancient language of the first men. This language consists of harsh, guttural sounds, but it is capable of expressing deep emotion. The giants possessed a rich oral history, passed down from generation to generation through song. Their songs were slow, sad, and beautiful. The most famous of these is the song known as the Last of the Giants, which tells of their ancient glory and their slow, tragic decline at the hands of human hunters. One of the most remarkable aspects of giant culture was their relationship with the woolly mammoths. Mammoths were massive, elephant-like beasts covered in thick, shaggy fur, boasting long, curved tusks. They were the only land animals in Westeros that could rival the giants in sheer size and power. Rather than hunting the mammoths to extinction, the giants formed a deep, symbiotic relationship with them. This was not a relationship of master and slave. The giants did not use whips or chains to control the mammoths. Instead, they treated them with respect, working together to survive the harsh northern winter. The giants learned to ride these great beasts, creating a form of cavalry that was unmatched in the ancient world. A giant riding a woolly mammoth was a sight of absolute gravity. The mammoths allowed the giants to travel vast distances across deep snowdrifts that would have exhausted a giant on foot. In return, the giants protected the mammoth calves from predators like direwolves and shadowcats. They also helped the mammoths find food by clearing heavy snow from buried grass and roots using their immense strength. Giants did not work metal. They never forged swords, shields, or armor. When they had to fight, they relied on crude but devastating weapons. Their primary weapon was a massive club, often made from the trunk of a fallen tree. Sometimes they would tie a heavy boulder to the end of a log using thick animal hides, creating a crude but effective maul capable of shattering stone walls or crushing armored men. When riding into battle on their mammoths, they became living siege engines, capable of trampling entire lines of soldiers and smashing through wooden gates with ease. The peaceful existence of the giants came to an end when the first men crossed the land bridge from Essos. The humans brought bronze weapons, leather armor, and a desperate need for land. As humans cleared the ancient forests to build farms and villages, they pushed the giants out of their traditional territories. The giants fought back to protect their homes, using their massive strength and their mammoth allies to smash human settlements. The wood dancers of the children of the forest often fought alongside the giants, calling upon the power of nature to resist the human invasion. Despite their incredible physical prowess, the giants could not withstand the endless tide of humanity. Humans reproduced much faster than giants, and their cooperative military tactics and ranged weapons slowly wore down the ancient defenders. Over centuries of bloody conflict, the giants were hunted, killed, and driven further and further north. Their stone halls were abandoned, and their ancient songs became more and more mournful. By the time the wall was built by Brandon the Builder, the remaining giants were trapped on the cold, unforgiving northern side, cut off forever from the fertile lands of the south. The creation of the wall was the final nail in the coffin for the giants' ancient lifestyle. This massive barrier of ice, stone, and ancient spells prevented them from ever returning to the south. The few hundred giants who remained beyond the wall had to adapt to an increasingly harsh environment. Food was scarce, and the winters were long and brutal. Their numbers dwindled with every passing century. The Night's Watch, tasked with defending the wall, grew to view the giants as mere myths, forgetting that their ancestors had once fought them in bloody wars. Thousands of years later, when the threat of the White Walkers returned to the far north, the surviving giants made a desperate alliance with the Free Folk. Under the leadership of Mance Rayder, the king beyond the wall, the remaining giants and their mammoths joined the wildling army. They did not do this out of a desire to conquer the south, but because they knew that staying in the far north meant certain death. Chieftains like Mag the Mighty, the greatest warrior of the giants, led his people south toward the wall, hoping to find safety on the other side. The tragic end of the giants was displayed during the Battle of Castle Black. In a desperate attempt to breach the wall, Mag the Mighty rode his mammoth to the heavy iron gate at the base of the wall. He used his immense strength to lift the heavy iron bars, sacrificing his life in a brutal duel with Gren and his brothers of the Night's Watch inside the dark tunnel. The death of Mag the Mighty was a devastating blow to the surviving giants, representing the loss of their greatest leader and the final fading of their ancient strength. Following the battle and the subsequent defeat of the wildling host, the few remaining giants faced a grim future. Some, like the gentle giant Wun Wun, survived to assist the living in the great wars to come. But their numbers were too small to sustain their species, with no young giants being born and their mammoth partners dying in the cold wars against the dead. The ancient race of giants quietly faded from the world. As scholars of the Citadel, we must look back on the history of the giants with a sense of profound sadness. They were a peaceful, gentle people who only fought when their homes were threatened. They lived in harmony with the great mammoths and the ancient forests, showing a respect for the natural world that humanity has never mastered. Their decline serves as a somber reminder that the world of men has little room for the ancient magic of the past. When the last giant took his final breath, a great and beautiful piece of Westeros was lost forever, leaving behind only sad songs and bones buried deep in the cold northern earth. Chapter 9. Terrors of the Deep, Krakens and Leviathans. While the kings of Westeros fight for crowns of gold and soil, and the Targaryens once claimed the open skies with their dragons, the true rulers of our world may dwell in the silent depths, far beneath the waves. To the west lies the endless Sunset Sea, a violent expanse of water that has swallowed every explorer brave enough to test its limits. To the north is the Shivering Sea, a freezing realm of ice, fog, and shadows. For thousands of years, sailors have whispered of the colossal shapes that move through these dark waters. These are not merely large fish or common beasts, but ancient forces of nature. They are creatures of such immense scale that they make the greatest castles of Westeros look like toys. To study these monsters is to look into the very cradle of our world's oldest, most terrifying mysteries. No people in the Seven Kingdoms are more obsessed with the secrets of the deep than the Ironborn. Their entire culture is built upon the worship of the drowned god, a deity said to dwell in a watery hall beneath the ocean. According to their priests, the sea is a place of eternal life for those who die in its cold embrace. In this watery underworld, the dead do not rot. Instead, They feast in the drowned gods' halls, served by the great beasts of the sea. This religious devotion has made the Ironborn the most fearless sailors in the world, but it has also filled their history with terrifying accounts of the monsters that share their god's domain. Their songs and legends are filled with tales of beasts that can crush a warship with a single blow of a tail or the pull of a tentacle. Among these legendary beasts, the Kraken is perhaps the most famous. It is the proud sigil of House Greyjoy, representing their desire to rise from the depths and wrap their reach around the world. For many years, the scholars at the Citadel dismissed the Kraken as a mere fable. They believed it was a story invented by drunken sailors to explain why old ships sank during violent storms. However, historical evidence and recent reports suggest these creatures are very real. A Kraken is essentially a giant cephalopod, a creature similar to a squid or an octopus, but grown to an impossible size. They possess many long, powerful arms lined with sharp, gripping suckers, and a massive, crushing beak at the center of their body. Unlike common squids, which remain in the darkest, deepest parts of the ocean, Krakens occasionally rise to the surface. When they do, the results are catastrophic. During the War of the Five Kings, reports reached the small council in King's Landing of a true Kraken attacking an Ibbenese whaling ship off the Fingers. The beast reportedly wrapped its colossal arms around the vessel and dragged it down into the dark water. The Ibbenese are famous for building some of the strongest, thickest ships in the world, designed to withstand the brutal northern ice. If a Kraken can pull down such a vessel with ease, it is clear that no standard warship could survive an encounter with one. Scholars believe that Krakens are highly sensitive to vibrations and the scent of blood in the water. In times of peace, they remain in the deep trenches where they hunt giant prey, but when wars are fought on the surface, and hundreds of men and horses are drowned in sea battles, the scent of blood acts as a powerful lure. The waters become choked with corpses, drawing Krakens up from the darkness by the dozens. There are also rumors of dark magic associated with these beasts. In the narrow sea, House Celtigar of Claw Isle is rumored to possess a horn of ancient Valyrian magic that can summon Krakens from the deep. If such a horn truly exists, it would be a weapon of terrifying power, capable of destroying any navy without firing a single arrow. While the Kraken is a monster of tentacles and shadows, there is another beast that claims the title of the largest living creature on Earth. This is the Leviathan, found mostly in the cold northern waters of the Shivering Sea. Leviathan are the true kings of the ocean. Many small folk use the word Leviathan to describe any large sea monster, but the scholars of the Citadel know they are a specific type of ancient whale. They are grey or white in colour, with skin as thick as stone and bodies longer than several city blocks. The great explorer Lomas Longstrider wrote that even the largest dragons of old Valyria would look small if placed next to a fully grown Leviathan. These gentle giants of the north are not naturally aggressive toward humans, but their sheer size makes them incredibly dangerous. A single casual movement of a Leviathan's tail can create a wave large enough to capsize a fleet of ships. They gather and breed in specific areas, such as the Leviathan Sound and the bays near the free city of Loreth. The Ibbenese, who are fearless whalers, actively hunt these massive beasts. Hunting a Leviathan is a task that requires immense courage and specialized ships. The Ibbenese use giant harpoons and thick ropes, fighting the Leviathans for days before the beast finally tires. The oil harvested from a single Leviathan can light the lamps of a city for months, and their bones are used to build strong, weather-resistant houses in the cold north. We must also discuss the legendary sea dragons, which differ from both Krakens and Leviathans. Unlike the whales of the north, sea dragons were said to be ancient reptilian predators of immense size and cruelty. The most famous of these was Naga, a sea dragon so massive that she fed on Leviathans and giant Krakens alike. According to Ironborn legend, the Grey King slew Naga thousands of years ago with the help of the drowned god. He then used her bones to build his hall on the island of Old Wyke. Today, visitors to Old Wyke can still see the giant petrified ribs of Naga rising from the grassy hill. Some Maesters argue these are not the bones of a dragon at all, but rather the ancient, fossilized remains of a giant Leviathan or a prehistoric tree. Yet, looking at their sharp curves and immense height, it is easy to believe that a terrible, fire-breathing monster of the sea once ruled these shores. The mystery of these creatures is closely tied to the mysteries of the geography of our world. Most of our knowledge comes from the Shivering Sea, or the Narrow Sea, where trade routes are well established. But the Sunset Sea remains an open grave. Brandon the Shipwright, an ancient king in the north, sailed into the Sunset Sea with a great fleet and was never seen again. His son, Brandon the Burner, burned the remaining ships in his grief, ending the North's ambitions as a naval power. Did Brandon the Shipwright's fleet succumb to violent storms, or did they sail directly into the hunting grounds of Krakens and Leviathans? Some northern legends whisper that the far west is home to sea monsters so large they can swallow islands whole. From a scientific perspective, the existence of these massive creatures tells us a great deal about the ecology of our world's oceans. For animals of this size to survive, the oceans must contain an incredibly rich and abundant supply of food. The deep trenches must be filled with massive schools of fish, giant crabs, and other deep-sea organisms that we have never seen. The relationship between Krakens and Leviathans is also one of intense rivalry. Just as sperm whales and giant squids battle in the deep oceans of ancient lore, the Leviathans and Krakens of our world likely wage a silent war in the dark depths, far below where any human eye can see. Ultimately, the Krakens and Leviathans remind us of how small and fragile human civilization truly is. We build our stone castles, light our fires, and march our armies across the land, believing we have conquered the world, but we only rule the dry land, which is a tiny fraction of this planet. The moment a ship leaves the safety of the harbour, it enters a wild, untamed realm where human laws mean nothing. In the deep, silent dark, the ancient kings of the earth still swim, waiting for the scent of blood to rise to the surface. Perhaps it is best that they remain in the depths, and that we, the creatures of the land, keep our eyes fixed on the shore. Chapter 10. The Exotic Bestiary, Basilisks, Manticores, and Shadowcats. To understand the true nature of our world, a scholar must look far beyond the safe stone walls of Old Town and the castles of Westeros. The grand tapestry of life is not merely composed of horses, hounds, and the common beasts of the field. In the dark corners of the earth, where the sun burns too hot or the frost bites too deep, nature has forged creatures of terrible design. These are the monsters of our legends, yet they are entirely real. They possess their own biology, their own hunting grounds, and their own deadly purposes. To study them is to study the raw, unforgiving edge of creation. We begin our journey in the green hell of the south, crossing the warm waters of the summer sea to a continent that has swallowed every army sent to conquer it. Sothorios is a land of death, a vast wilderness of choking jungles, boiling rivers, and ancient ruins made of oily black stone. It is a place where even the air carries disease, and the native fauna is designed to kill. Among the most feared of these creatures is the basilisk. Long ago, these terrible reptiles infested the group of islands off the northwestern coast of the continent, which we now call the Basilisk Isles, though the pirate crews and corsairs who rule those islands today have driven the beasts from the shorelines. The basilisks still rule the deep, untamed jungles of the mainland. Physically, the basilisk is a creature of nightmare. It is a massive, heavily armoured reptile, possessing a low, powerful body and jaws that can crush bone with a single snap. They exist in various sizes, from small, venomous specimens no larger than a hound, to monstrous beasts that crawl through the deep swamps, reportedly growing as large as dragons, though they lack the gift of flight. Their skin is thick and scaly, often dark green or muddy brown to blend in with the rotting vegetation of the jungle floor. They are patient hunters, waiting in the mud and the shadows of great trees for prey to pass by before striking with terrifying speed. But it is not merely the size or the strength of the basilisk that makes it a legend among maesters and warriors alike. It is their blood. Basilisk blood is a substance of dark and terrible power. It is not a poison in the traditional sense, for it does not stop the heart or stop the breath. Instead, it is an alchemical agent of pure madness. If a warm-blooded beast or a man ingests even a small drop of basilisk blood, or if it enters their veins through a wound, a terrible transformation occurs. The mind is instantly shattered. The victim is consumed by a mindless, homicidal rage, attacking any living thing in sight, including its own kind, until its heart bursts from the sheer strain. This horrific property has made basilisk blood a highly prized commodity in the dark markets of the world. In the fighting pits of Meereen and the other cities of Slavers Bay, pit bosses have been known to smear a tiny amount of the blood onto the meat fed to their beasts, or even their slaves, before they are sent into the arena. The resulting slaughter is spectacular and terrible, a display of raw, unnatural fury that delights the crowds but leaves nothing but death in its wake. In the free cities, assassin guilds and rogue alchemists whisper of its uses, knowing that a target fed a drop of this substance will destroy themselves and those they love, leaving no trace of a conventional poison for a maester to detect. If the basilisk represents the blunt, furious power of the southern jungles, the manticore represents the silent, precise lethality of the Far East. Found in the warm, humid islands of the eastern Jade Sea, and deep within the mysterious shadowlands beyond Ashai, the manticore is a creature of small size but infinite danger. It is an insect-like beast, though it possesses characteristics that seem almost unnatural, leading some ancient writers to wonder if they were first created by the blood mages of Valyria. A manticore is roughly the size of a large beetle or a crab, but its appearance is far more unsettling. Its carapace is dark and shiny, and on its back the natural markings often form a pattern that looks remarkably like a human face. This grim visage has given rise to many peasant superstitions, with some claiming the beasts harbour the souls of wicked men. At the rear of its body lies its primary weapon, a long, segmented tail that curves over its back, ending in a wicked, needle-sharp stinger. The manticore is a patient, stealthy predator. It can compress its body to hide in the smallest crevice, waiting for hours in absolute stillness. When it strikes, it does so with a sudden, silent lunge, driving its stinger deep into the flesh of its victim. The venom of a manticore is among the most rapid and deadly poisons known to natural philosophy. A single sting from a healthy manticore can kill a grown man in the space of a heartbeat. The poison causes the blood to coagulate instantly, stopping the heart before the victim can even scream. Because of this efficiency, manticores are highly valued by those who deal in death. They are kept in small, specially crafted boxes of wood or silver, kept alive on a diet of insects and sugar water until they are needed. The Sorrowful Men, an ancient and secretive guild of assassins based in the port of Karth, are known to favour the manticore for their work. They slip the tiny beasts into the bedchambers of their targets, or drop them onto their clothing, allowing the manticore to do its deadly work in silence, leaving the assassin to depart with a polite word of condolence to the grieving family. Yet, the venom of the manticore can be manipulated by those with sufficient skill. If the venom is harvested and treated with certain rare herbs and minerals, its immediate lethality can be delayed, turned instead into a slow, eating rot. This was the dark science employed by Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dawn. When he fought the massive knight Gregor Clegane in the trial by combat, he coated the tip of his spear with modified manticore venom. The poison did not kill the giant instantly. Instead, it lingered in his wounds, causing his flesh to turn black and die while he was still alive, screaming in agony for days as his body slowly dissolved from within. While the basilisk and the manticore are creatures of distant, foreign lands, we must not think that Westeros is free from such deadly predators. In our own lands, high in the cold and rocky places, dwells a hunter of equal ferocity and unmatched stealth, the Shadowcat. The Shadowcat is a large wildcat, far bigger than any domestic feline, and larger even than the mountain lions that once roamed the hills of the Westerlands. They are built for the harsh, unforgiving terrain of the north and the high mountains. Their bodies are lean and muscular, designed for leaping across deep chasms and climbing near vertical cliffs of stone and ice. Their fur is their defining feature, a thick, dense coat of midnight black, broken only by sharp, stark stripes of snowy white. This pattern provides them with perfect camouflage in the high country, where dark stone meets white snow. A Shadowcat can stand perfectly still against a rocky cliffside in the twilight, entirely invisible to the eyes of travelers until it is too late. These great cats are found in two primary regions of Westeros. The largest populations dwell in the vast, unexplored forests and frozen mountains of the lands beyond the wall, where they hunt the elk, the mountain goat, and any unwary wildling who wanders too far from their village. However, they are also highly common in the south, specifically within the rugged and inaccessible peaks of the Mountains of the Moon in the Vale of Arryn. For centuries, the Shadowcats of the Vale have been a constant terror for those who travel the high road. They are patient stalkers, following caravans from the high ridges, waiting for a horse to lose its footing or a guard to fall asleep before sliding down the rocks like a drift of smoke. The Shadowcat is a solitary hunter, relying on its keen senses of sight and smell to track its prey in the dark. Their eyes glow with a pale, cold light in the night, reflecting the moon as they watch from the shadows. They possess long, curved claws that can grip the slickest ice, and jaws strong enough to break the neck of an ox. Unlike the wolf, which hunts in packs with loud baying, the Shadowcat is a silent killer. It does not make a sound until the moment it leaps, and by then, the hunt is already over. Despite their ferocity, humans have long sought to exploit the Shadowcat. Their thick, beautiful pelts are highly prized by lords and ladies across the Seven Kingdoms, valued both for their striking beauty and their ability to keep out the bitterest winter cold. A cloak of Shadowcat fur is a mark of a skilled hunter, for taking down one of these beasts in its own mountain territory is no small feat. There are also those who have sought to bend the Shadowcat to their will. Among the wildlings beyond the wall, there are rare individuals known as Skinchangers or wargs, men and women who possess the magical ability to project their consciousness into the minds of beasts. To slip into the mind of a Shadowcat is said to be a dangerous and harrowing experience. Unlike wolves, which are pack animals with a natural instinct for loyalty, the Shadowcat is a creature of absolute solitude and cold, calculating cruelty. A Skinchanger who controls a Shadowcat must constantly fight against the beast's desire to slip into the darkness, to hunt and tear and kill without reason. Yet, those who master them possess a scout and the assassin of unparalleled skill. In the end, these three creatures, the Basilisk of the southern jungles, the Manticore of the eastern seas, and the Shadowcat of our northern mountains, remind us of a simple truth. The world we inhabit is not ours alone. While kings fight their wars for iron thrones and lords squabble over borders, these ancient predators continue their eternal, silent hunts. They do not care for the laws of men, nor do they respect the boundaries of empires. They are the true masters of the wild, surviving by venom, claw, and shadow, as they have done since the dawn of days. Chapter 11. The Old Magic, Skinchangers and the Ravens. To understand the true nature of the ancient magic that once ruled the continent of Westeros, we must turn our eyes away from the high stone castles and look deep into the dark, silent forests of the north. Long before the Andals brought their steel weapons and their 7 gods across the narrow sea, the first men and the children of the forest shared a quiet, powerful connection with the natural world. This was not the magic of fire and blood, like the sorcery practiced by the dragon lords of Valyria. Instead, it was an older, colder magic, rooted in the earth, the trees, and the minds of wild beasts. It is a spiritual phenomenon we call skin-changing. To the untrained eye, skin-changing is often dismissed as a simple fairy tale told by wet nurses to frighten young children. However, a close study of historical records and the accounts of those who live beyond the wall reveals that this ability is very real, possesses its own natural laws, and behaves like a profound biological bond. At its core, skin changing is the rare ability of a human being to project their own mind and consciousness into the body of an animal. Through this bond, the human does not merely control the beast like a puppet. Instead, they see through the beast's eyes, hear through its ears, and feel the world through its paws, wings, or claws. The process of skin changing usually begins in a person's youth, often appearing first in the form of highly vivid dreams. A young skin changer might wake up with the taste of raw meat in their mouth, or feel their legs twitching as if they had been running through the snow all night. In these dreams, the child is seeing the world through the eyes of a beast. Over time, and with careful practice, a skin changer can learn to enter the mind of an animal at will while they are awake. When this occurs, the physical state of the human body undergoes a dramatic change. The skin changer's human body falls into a deep comatose trance. Their eyes glaze over, turning a pale, milky white, and they become completely helpless. Their mind has left their flesh behind, traveling into the skin of another creature. While the word warg is often used to describe anyone with this talent, this is a common misunderstanding. In the true vocabulary of the old magic, a skin changer is the general term for anyone who can enter the mind of an animal. A warg is a very specific type of skin changer, one who has bonded with a wolf or a dog. Wolves are proud, pack-oriented predators, and forging a bond with them requires a powerful will. Dogs, because they have lived alongside humans for thousands of years, are much easier to enter and control. Other animals present different challenges and dangers to the skin changer's mind. Slipping into the mind of a bird, such as an eagle or a hawk, is highly tempting because it offers the ultimate freedom of flight. However, those who spend too much time soaring in the sky risk losing touch with the mundane, heavy things of the earth. They may forget their human lives entirely, wishing only to fly. Cats are vain, cruel, and independent creatures, and they will fight bitterly against any attempt to control them, requiring a skin changer to force their will upon the beast rather than cooperate with it. Prey animals, such as elk or deer, are incredibly dangerous in a different way. If a skin changer remains inside a prey animal for too long, they can inherit the beast's constant, paralyzing fear, turning the human into a coward even when they return to their own flesh. Because this magic connects two living minds, it is guided by strict moral rules. Among the free folk who live beyond the wall, where skin changes are most common, there are 3 ancient laws that must never be broken. To violate these rules is to commit an abomination, a sin against the old gods and against nature itself. The first abomination is to eat the flesh of a human while living inside the skin of a beast. To do so tears at the very fabric of the skin changer's humanity, dragging them down into beastly savagery. The second abomination is to mate as an animal with another animal while your human mind is inside the beast's body. This act blurs the boundary between human spirit and animal instinct, causing the skin changer to lose their sense of self. The third and most terrible abomination of all is to seize the mind of another human being. To force your way into the mind of another person is a horrific crime. Unlike animals, which can eventually accept a human presence, a human mind will fight against an intruder with everything it has. The victim will scream, weep, and tear at their own brain, and the experience can easily drive both the victim and the skin changer completely insane. Only a skin changer of immense rare power would ever attempt such an act, and the moral cost is devastating. Even when these rules are respected, the bond between skin changer and beast is never entirely one-sided. Over many years, the personalities of the human and the animal begin to merge. The human takes on the traits of the beast, becoming wilder, more aggressive, or more silent. Likewise, the animal takes on a strange intelligence, behaving with a purpose and focus that is unusual for its species. This connection is so deep that it can survive even the physical death of the human. When a skin changer's human body is killed, their consciousness does not immediately vanish. If they are quick enough, their mind will slip into their bonded animal to live what is known as a second life. In this second life, the the Skinchanger can survive for many years inside the beast. However, this survival is not a true reincarnation. Without a human brain to anchor them, the Skinchanger's human memories will slowly begin to fade. Day by day, they will forget the faces of their family, the words of their language, and the concept of their human past. Eventually, nothing of the human remains, and the spirit is completely absorbed into the wild nature of the beast. As extraordinary as skin changing is, it is only the first step into a much larger, much deeper pool of ancient magic. Beyond the skin changer lies the green seer. The children of the forest claimed that while 1 man in 1,000 is born a skin changer, only 1 skin changer in 1,000 is born a green seer. These rare individuals possess not only the power to slip into the minds of beasts, but also the gift of green sight. Green sight is the ability to perceive things far beyond the limitations of normal human sight. A person with the green sight experiences prophetic dreams, often called green dreams. These dreams do not show the world as it is, but rather as it was, or as it will be. They are filled with strange symbols, dark shadows, and metaphors that can be incredibly difficult to interpret. A green dream might show a sea rushing over the stone walls of a castle, symbolizing an upcoming invasion, or a dead king with a crown of bronze. These visions are absolute and cannot be changed. What a green seer sees in their dreams will eventually come to pass, no matter how hard mortals try to prevent it. But the true power of a green seer lies in their connection to the weirwood trees. These ancient white-barked trees with blood-red leaves and carved faces are not merely religious symbols for the Northmen. They are living, biological vessels for a massive, timeless memory network. When a green seer sits beneath a weirwood tree, they can project their consciousness into the roots and bark of the tree itself. Because the weirwoods do not experience time the way humans do, a green seer inside the tree can look out through the carved eyes of any weirwood in Westeros, seeing the past, the present, and the future all at once. To a green seer, the tree is the acorn, and the acorn is the tree. Time is not a straight line, but a vast, flowing river, and from the safety of the weirwood network, they can watch the events of history unfold as if they were happening in the present moment. They can watch the ancient kings of winter kneel before their altars, or watch the great battles of the past play out on the plains below. This network is what the Northmen call the Old Gods. The Old Gods are not distant, invisible spirits in the sky. They are the collective consciousness of thousands of green seers and skin changers who, upon the death of their physical bodies, chose to slip their minds into the weirwood roots rather than into an animal. Inside the wood, their individual identities merged into a single, massive, and eternal mind that watches over the land. At the heart of this network sits a figure known to legend as the Three-Eyed Raven. In reality, this entity is a title and a duty, passed down from one powerful green seer to another across the centuries. The last known mortal to hold this title before the modern era was Brynden Rivers, a Targaryen bastard who vanished north of the Wall decades ago. When he was finally found, his human body was nearly dead, skeletal and pale, trapped in a throne of tangled weirwood roots deep inside a hidden cave. The roots had grown through his legs, into his chest, and even out of his empty eye socket, sustaining his ancient body while his mind travelled the vast pathways of the weirwood network. The Three-Eyed Raven acts as the memory of the world. Without this entity, humanity would have no true record of its own past, leaving it vulnerable to repeating the same terrible mistakes. Through the ravens that fly across the kingdoms, and through the quiet, watching faces carved into the white trees, this ancient magic keeps its silent vigil. It is a reminder that the world is much older and much stranger than the lords of Westeros believe, and that some spirits never truly die. They simply wait in the shadows of the forest, watching through the eyes of the beasts. Chapter 12. The Rebirth of Magic. The Red Waste Hatching. For more than a century, the world of men grew cold, quiet, and predictable. When the last Targaryen dragon died in the year 153 after Aegon's conquest, It was not merely the death of a beast. It was the closing of a great golden eye. The last dragon was a small, green, withered thing, born with twisted wings and a ruined body, unable to fly or feed. When her breath flickered out in the pits of the Red Keep, she took the deep magic of the world with her into the dark. For the generations that followed, the world belonged to the scholars, the builders, and the keepers of ledgers. In the high towers of the citadel in Old Town, the Maesters forged their links of pewter and iron, convinced that the age of myth was finished. They taught that the world could be measured by mathematics and understood through the dissection of common beasts. The great obsidian glass candles of Valyria stood cold and dark in the corners of the citadel, useless blocks of black stone. The pyromancers of King's Landing, once feared for their terrible green fire, found their spells failing. They had to rely on slow, dangerous chemical mixtures to brew even small jars of wildfire, crying out to gods who seemed to have gone deaf. Magic had become a whispered story, told by grandmothers to children who did not believe them. But magic, like a river during a long summer drought, did not vanish entirely. It retreated deep into the earth, waiting for a channel to open, waiting for a spark to clear the stones that blocked its flow. That spark would not come from the ancient, damp valleys of Westeros, nor from the cold peaks of the north. It would come from the most desolate, lifeless place in the eastern lands, the Red Waste. The Red Waste is a vast desert of red sand, dry bones, and ancient forgotten ruins. It is a place where nothing grows, where the wind blows like a furnace, and where even the hardiest travellers find only thirst and death. It was in this barren wilderness, surrounded by a tiny, starving remnant of a once great Dothraki Khalazar, that Daenerys Targaryen prepared a funeral pyre for her husband Khal Drogo. At the centre of this pyre, she placed 3 dragon eggs. To any maester of the citadel, these eggs were nothing more than beautiful, heavy stones. They had spent hundreds of years in the Shadowlands beyond Ashai, petrified by time and the cold, lifeless air of the east. Their shells were hard as rock, painted in deep shades of green, cream, and midnight black. Under normal circumstances, no fire of wood or oil could ever hatch them. They were dead things, fossils of a lost empire. Yet, the young Targaryen princess understood a truth that the scholars of Old Town had forgotten. The sorcery of old Valyria was not built on books and theories. It was built on fire and blood. To wake the dragons from their stone sleep, a terrible price had to be paid. A life-for-life equation was required to open the gates of the womb. The pyre was constructed with careful, ritualistic precision. First came the dry brush and heavy logs, stacked high to catch the desert wind. Then came the treasures of the deceased warlord, his great bow, his golden collar, and the bodies of his finest horses. At the heart of the wood, Daenerys laid the 3 stone eggs. Finally, she bound Mirri Maz Duur to the stake. The Lazarene godswife was a practitioner of blood magic, a woman who had used her dark arts to steal the life of Daenerys's unborn son Rhaego and leave Khal Drogo a mindless shell. When the torch was applied, the dry wood caught instantly. The flames rose like orange giants into the desert night, screaming as they consumed the dry timber. As the fire grew, Mirri Maz Duur began to sing a high, piercing song of death and power. But as the heat intensified, her song turned to screams of mortal agony. This was the catalyst. The death of the witch provided the raw spiritual energy, the hot blood of sacrifice, that the stone eggs required. The spirit of the warlord Khal Drogo provided the strength, the lingering shadow of the unborn child, Rhaego, who had been born with scales and wings, served as the bridge between the human and the draconic. It was a perfect storm of blood magic, Targaryen bloodline, and intense heat. As the fire reached its peak, a strange phenomenon occurred. The heat became so intense that the air itself seemed to bend and shimmer, turning purple and blue. The spectators, hardened Dothraki warriors, shielded their eyes and fell to the ground in terror. Inside the heart of the inferno, the stone shells of the eggs began to crack. The The sound of their shattering was like the sound of breaking ice, sharp and loud over the roar of the flames. From the ashes of the pyre, the three beasts emerged. They were small, no larger than hunting hawks, but they were perfect. Drogon, black as coal with scales of shadow and eyes like molten gold, clung to his mother's shoulder. Rhaegal, green as the moss of the deep forest, and Viserion, cream and gold like morning sunlight, rested at her feet. Their bodies were warm, radiating a heat that was far greater than any normal lizard. Their lungs held a tiny spark of the original fire that had created the Valyrian peninsula. When Daenerys rose from the ashes, untouched by the flames that had reduced her clothing to dust, the world changed forever. The birth of these three small creatures sent a massive shockwave through the invisible currents of the world. It was as if a great, heavy dam had been broken, allowing the waters of magic to rush back into the dry valleys of the earth. Thousands of miles away, in the dark chambers of the citadel, the changes were felt almost immediately. The glass candles of black obsidian, which had sat cold and lifeless for 150 years, began to glow. At first they flickered with a faint pale light, like the first stars of evening. Then they burned with a bright, sharp flame that cast no shadows. This fire did not burn down the stone, nor did it produce smoke, but its light was so intense that it revealed things hidden in the dark corners of the room. The Maesters, who had spent their lives mocking the old stories, stood in silence, staring at the burning obsidian, realizing that their orderly, predictable world was coming to an end. In King's Landing, the Alchemists' Guild experienced a sudden, terrifying surge in their craft. For decades, the acolytes had toiled over their stone jars, struggling to create small amounts of wildfire. Now, the substance seemed to brew itself with frightening speed. The spells they muttered over the green liquid, spells that had been useless murmurs for a century, suddenly carried real, physical power. The wildfire they created was hotter, more volatile, and more dangerous than any batch produced since the days of the Dragon Kings. The pyromancers did not understand why their art had returned, but they felt the heat of it in their bones. In the eastern city of Karth, the effects were even more visible. The warlocks of the House of the Undying, who had long survived on cheap tricks, illusions, and the dust of blue leaves, felt their ancient powers return. In the streets of the city, fire mages performed wonders that had not been seen for ages. They threw ropes of flame into the night sky, climbing them as if they were made of silk, before vanishing into the air. Street performers could call down real fire from the clouds, and the warlocks themselves began to whisper of visions that were no longer dreams but true glimpses of the future. Yet, this sudden return of magical energy did not bring peace or balance. The world of ice and fire is governed by a strict natural law. Every force must have an equal and opposite reaction. The rising of the dragon fire in the east did not happen in isolation. It acted as a cosmic weight, shifting the balance of the seasons. Deep in the far north, beyond the wall, where the snow never melts and the wind screams through the ancient pines, another power was waking. The White Walkers, the ancient beings of ice and death, had been dormant for thousands of years, waiting in the shadows of the land of always winter. As the magical currents of the world warmed with the birth of the dragons, the cold magic of the north began to gather its strength to resist it. The return of the dragons did not cause the winter, but it accelerated its arrival, making it sharper, darker, and far more dangerous. The ice magic of the others grew stronger, as if in response to the great heat rising in the east. The dead began to rise with greater frequency, their blue eyes glowing with a cold light that mirrored the hot gold of the dragon's eyes. The natural cycle of the seasons, already erratic, began to lean heavily toward a long, terrible night. The three dragons born in the Red Waste were not just animals. They were the physical vessels of the world's living fire. Their breathing, their growth, and their very existence kept the magical channels of the earth open and flowing. As they grew, eating meat and breathing hotter flames, the sorcery of the world grew with them. The red comet that cut across the sky, seen by kings and beggars alike, was the great banner of this new age, an age of wonder, of terror, and of a cold, creeping shadow that would soon challenge the light of the sun.